Hi there. I'm here with Karen Dillon, the author of a bestseller, The Prosperity Paradox, and she wrote this book with Clayton Christensen and Ifosa Ojomo.
Yes, perfect.
Say
yes.
that? Yeah. And I read the book, and they were gracious enough to send me a pre-release copy, and I took a lot of notes, and I tweeted about this book. I believe this book actually is timely for geopolitical sort of development we see, the nationalist movement, and every country is trying to close themselves. And being from a developing country, moved here about 24 years back. I saw how India was growing, and I'm an economics major. Also, like I got very interested in this.
Yes, yes.
So I'm in tech for long, and this book talks about technology, application of technology for the economic development of
Yes.
these developing nations, right?
Yes.
It has lots of great theories which are applicable in these countries, and I'm very happy to be here and talking to you, and I have a few questions for you.
Sure, happy to be here as well. Thank you so much.
So, just first one, like, how did you guys come about writing this book? What was the motivation?
So this is the third book I've worked on with Clay. I have been his co-author 2 times before, the honor of doing that. And Ifosa, our co-author, was one of his students. And so in his class, Ifosa and he had begun talking about the application of some of the theories they were learning, or he was teaching in class, about how do you apply it to development effectively. So Ifosa was asked to stay on with Clay and do research, and it led to them coming up with the ideas in this book. And they asked me to join them in writing, because I've written several times with Clay before, so it's a collaboration of the 3 of us.
That's awesome. And you were earlier, I saw your LinkedIn, you were chief editor.
I was the editor of Harvard Business Review
Harvard,
magazine, right, which is when I first started working with Clay.
Which I read for so many years.
I'm so glad to hear it.
Yeah. So there are a lot of thought-provoking sort of ideas in this book. I just want to pick your brain on sort of what was the thought behind
Sure.
these kind of ideas. One was the lobbying is making U.S. institutions weak. There was a reference to that in then how the institutions. We usually tend to think that institutional void is what is causing these countries to drag back, and then
Right.
you guys questioned that. So you guys said you cannot copy the same institutions from a developed nation to these nations, and you have to sort of localize it. Shed some light on that.
Sure. So I think the sort of the underpinning idea there is that so often we look at a country that's not as fully developed or economically strong as Western countries, for example, and say, well, I can't possibly go and do business there because they don't have a good court system, or they don't have laws that make sense for business, or if I get ripped off, or if I face corruption, the institutions are not strong there. So it seems like it's an impediment to even thinking about doing business in some countries. What we said is that we know that strong institutions can't just be imported and thrown on in perfect form, often Western version of perfect form, but they have to emerge from the culture within. And it might be that they don't look like our institutions, or England's institutions, or France's institutions, at least not for quite a long time, but they're stronger when they emerge from there being basically a business imperative that we agree, our culture agrees that it is important to honor a word, it is important to have a constitution, it is important to have a law that supports the deal making and things like that, that as much as we might want to just hand off the perfect solution, we say add water and stir, that's not how strong institutions are formed. And the strong institutions are formed by emergence. They emerge from within a culture and an economy, and you can't expect it to be otherwise.
Yeah, actually, I just love this. Of course, I love the academics we talked about earlier. So you guys said that institutions are the codification of tribal knowledge.
Yes,
right?
and so of culture, of what we. This is what we believe. This is what we prioritize. This is how we solve problems together. That emerges from within a culture, and so that it is just codification of that. And the institutions become a way that we agree to all follow by these rules.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've seen this pattern, like Amazon is trying to go to India, Walmart went to India, and being from India, I can tell that that model which we have here is not going to work there.
Right.
Because most of India lives in villages, and most of the other developing countries are like that too.
Right.
Africa and other developing nations, they have similar sort of settings, if you will,
right.
And then copying institutions as is, or the corporate structures
right.
as is.
Right.
It's not going
to. We say in the book, and we believe that everything it has to come in cultural context. So strong innovations come. We have a chapter or a section called "For Us by Us." It has to be reflective of the reality of where people live and how they live. The business model might need to be totally different. You can't just assume that what works there will work here. If it starts here and it reflects our reality, where people are, what do they value? Do they need overnight? Where do we make the money? If you think of it from scratch in the context of the local community, that's how it will take root.
That's great, actually. And you guys also, I noticed that woven the theory of disruption into the book.
Yes.
And also the theory of things to be done.
Yes.
Right?
I
loved seeing those in there.
Yes.
And shed some light on that, like how these nations or the institutions in these nations, or at the state level or district level in these countries, or they can have county or districts, right? How they can implement those sort of mechanisms or think differently.
Well, I think differently is the key. We say this book is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. We don't have all the answers, but we hope that people see through the book and through the examples that innovation can play a really important catalytic role in sort of igniting an economy. It's not going to do it by itself, but I think sometimes local governments and NGOs don't recognize the power of innovation that's taken root, and things can build from there.
Yeah.
But if it's seen that we have to make this perfectly right for companies and businesses to come in before we sort of make it open our doors for business, then you may never have the green shoots of innovation coming up first. And it's very powerful when something finds a market, creates a market, and begins to thrive even in spite of lack of institutions and difficult circumstances and supply chain problems, all the things that they survive. It's almost like those are the really strong ones because they've still, in spite of that, found a market opportunity.
Another actually aspect which I really liked was that you guys talked about two types of innovations at high level. One was the sustaining innovation, and then the other one was market creation or market creating innovation.
Yes.
Yeah. So which is fascinating, actually, distinction which we usually don't think about. So I actually work with startups in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. So I preach this to there are 10 types of innovation, and there's a book written on that.
Right.
So there's a channel innovation, partnerships innovation, and then there's business model innovation and market creating innovation, market creation, you can say. So shed some light on that, how these countries can create more like market creating innovations as compared to sustaining, and what is the main distinction, or why just sustaining is not that appealing to move fast?
So we actually talk about three types that companies tend to default to. Sustaining is one, which is basically add a new color or add new features, heated seats in your cars or the next model of something. It's a very natural and important part of any company's, continued progress and holding on to its market share, but you're not going to get enormous growth from that. You're going to keep your customers, hopefully, maybe a few more, but it's sort of normal business and you're expected to do that. There's another type of innovation we call efficiency innovation, which is basically how do we get our costs down so we can free up more capital and then potentially invest in a different way. That's when you see outsourcing or finding ways to automate something, taking sort of human costs out of it. Both are essential for being smart about freeing up your cash and keeping your customers. But the third type, our language, market creating innovation, is where the real growth potential is. You've created a market, created customers, created a product, a service, a business model where there wasn't anything before. And so you're really competing against nothing.
Yeah.
You're competing against, there is no other product or service to buy that does this thing for us. So that for us opens up the enormous potential for growth. It has to scale. You know, we start with, I said, with the green shoots of hope in spite of all these difficult obstacles. Eventually, your business model has to be innovative enough that you make money, and then it has to scale. But it starts locally, and that's the power of it. So recognizing that nurturing, fanning, expecting, tolerating, you know, playing some role in encouraging innovators and entrepreneurs to see opportunities and start growing, that has enormous potential for growth.
So the innovation has to be localized.
It starts local. It starts. That's where you find the point is it's organic. Exactly. Yeah. You see opportunities and you see them in the context of your potential customer. If you're just assuming we can just shape a little bit something that's worked elsewhere, that's, you know, it's like you mentioned Amazon in India. It's not the same. It has to be reflective of your local customers.
And then the theory of disruption talks about going to the non-consumers.
Yes.
I think it's a natural sort of fit in that market creating innovation.
Yes,
right?
it is. It's identifying where people they don't even have data because there aren't people who are already in the category of buying this product or service. But if you're disruptive, you're creating something that's that's more economical for people to buy, more accessible, affordable. You're creating a whole new set of consumers who wouldn't otherwise be counted in anybody's data at all. So yes, you look for the non-consumers. That's your growth base.
And another thought-provoking idea was that corruption is not a problem; it's a solution.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So let's talk about that.
Explain that. It's a provocative chapter title.
Yeah.
Corruption is not the problem; it's the solution. What we're not saying is corruption is the best way forward. We're saying understand why corruption happens. It's not because we don't believe people are inherently immoral in some way.
Yeah.
It's that people are trying to solve the struggles in their own life the best way they possibly can. And corruption so often is actually a rational choice. If I am corrupt in this way that my society tolerates, I will have money or service or access that I wouldn't otherwise have that allow my family to eat or have a better life in some way. It's a rational choice to very unusual circumstances that you live in. But we know that corruption evolves over time. You can put all the anti-corruption laws in the world you want in until a country or a region's culture makes corruption not the best solution for solving your problem. People are going to ignore those laws. We talk in the book about streaming, what's the right word for it? BitTorrent, getting the music video. There were laws for years all over the world, but certainly in America, about intellectual property and copyright, and in theory you could never do that. Everybody I know made a mixtape at a minimum, and then it got more and more sophisticated. That only stopped when better solutions for actually, I'm going to get Spotify. Yeah. That's a better solution for my desire for music, and I'm willing to pay the price for it than the risk of being corrupt and not following the law. When the solutions are better, corruption fades away. So people are only choosing corruption because it's the best choice, rationally on some level. And then when better solutions occur, they leave it behind.
They leave it behind. So study why it's happening, and then you and kill that argument, if you will, kill those circumstances under which that corruption is happening.
Or you give them a better alternative for making money or whatever they're struggling with. If you give them a better choice, people choose it.
Yeah. Actually, I can give you one example. I visit India pretty frequently, still some family there. So they used to have a system in place, like they're called patwaris. Like they give you the papers for your land.
Yes.
Right. So I'm citing India because the other countries have similar situations. I bet. I have traveled 18 countries. I've seen the sort of patterns. So the farmers had to bribe these officials to get the papers for their own land.
Right.
These are records. Here we can just print our own, right?
Right.
Or just call the county and we get it, right? But that was not the case there because people were not educated in villages.
Right.
So they didn't know how to do that, or they didn't know how to fill the application. So they will give like 5,000 rupees or something like that. But now they have digitized it.
Right.
New kids now they can go to. They don't have internet in most homes now still.
Right.
So they go to internet cafe, and their kids can go there and put in their names and now they have Aadhaar card, and then they put that in there, and then they can print these papers. So I think digitization lowers the corruption. Technology actually lowers the corruption.
Right,
It
right.
brings
Because
the
you create
transparency.
accessible and affordable, right? You've made
exactly.
it easier for people to get to that. And the previous stage is what we would have called the transparent and predictable corruption. The worst is when it's unpredictable and covert, and you can't figure out who am I supposed to bribe, and I don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
The second stage on the way to ultimately transparency is, all right, I know the rules. I have to bribe a farmer X amount. Third, you start to emerge. We have a better solution to the problem. It's easy to get. Your kids can do it. It's accessible and affordable. Corruption starts to go right down.
That's a great way to look at it. So corruption evolves.
It evolves, yes.
That's great. Awesome. So another question, another thing, when I was reading this book, I thought like this is not only applicable to countries. It can be applied to institutions in themselves, or corporations, companies, because they are systems. They behave this kind of similar way.
It's true.
So, what's your thought? Actually, I would say, why did you title this book like "Taking Nations Out of Poverty" versus addressing systematic problems, like a generic title, so you can sell more books?
That's
maybe.
true. That is true. That's true. Maybe it may be true, but I think the idea of the book is it's really broadly applicable in that if you look at the problems with a different set of lenses, if you're looking differently than we tend to look, you might see better solutions. So that's applicable from looking at corruption. It is not necessarily a forever obstacle, but you provide a better solution. It's in terms of looking at non-consumers as your growth opportunity. It's looking within your institutions and saying, what are we prioritizing? What are we valuing? Is that actually reflective of our culture? All of those things can evolve, but you have to recognize the power of creating a market for people to choose something else. That's where all the energy and power comes from, and that's applicable really broadly, I think.
Yeah. Actually, that's what I thought. Actually, maybe that would be the next book.
Maybe we'll give a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe your book, Sarvjeet. Maybe you start.
Maybe I will be able to do one chapter or something, because I'm
you
so
start writing on
enthusiastic.
it. You are fantastic. You go. That was our hope. Our hope with the book is to start a conversation. We don't think we have all the answers, but you take it and run. The whole point is everybody can add to this thinking, and maybe we can solve some of the world's toughest problems if we all sort of think, what can I think about differently?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was thinking, like, when I saw the title, like, who's the audience for this book? Is it just the directors at IMF only, or is this for UNO people? Because they think about globally, about countries, and is it for country heads or people who work in these think tanks, if you will,
right.
like in different countries, to move the country forward, and the policymakers, right? But I think this is for this can be for administrators at the city level.
Yes.
It can.
Yes. We think it's for companies, for innovators to realize there's opportunity out there that you haven't even seen. This, in some ways, is a tip sheet, right? It's think about these enormous growth opportunities that we already see all over the world as a reminder of what's possible, and maybe starting with the too narrow innovation lens, the sustaining and efficiency innovation. If you start to look more broadly about where does that growth come from, it's an enormous opportunity for new growth that perhaps you haven't thought about.
Yeah, actually, that's a great kind of segue into the topic, which is near to my heart, because I live in Silicon Valley lived there for the last 24 hours.
You're traveling too much.
Years.
You're traveling
24
too much.
years. I have traveled a lot. So I have been associated with a startup incubator.
Yes.
So we have taken about 75 startups through the program so far, and I have worked with other incubators in the Bay Area. So it's a magnet. Silicon Valley is a magnet for technology talent.
Right.
So the kids come from other countries, form companies, and sometimes they leave, or sometimes they stay here, and they sell companies very quickly. Very young kids,
right.
So like Instagram was sold for 1 billion 6 people company, like Mark
Right.
Zuckerberg story. You know that.
Yes.
So and these people who come from other countries for studying here, and then they form a company. They want to take that innovation now, because now is a good time for them, because now the networks are better.
Right.
They have better cell phone coverage, and the smartphones are cheaper. So they're kind of leapfrogging. These countries are leapfrogging into the communication patterns, if you will, or they have better communication mechanisms. So these people want to create startups in those countries.
Right.
And this book talks about that also.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe this book is all these startups folks in the Silicon Valley, they should read these books. Like, what are the opportunities in these emerging nations, and what's the best foot forward? Not only the people who are starting the companies, I believe, but also the VCs, the people who invest money.
Right.
I think a VC community should read this book. What's your thought on that? Like when we're trying to create these startups in these countries, which are big markets, because markets are huge, and number of people in India are like more than a billion, and China is a little different kind of system. But in other parts of the world, what are the tips for startups and VCs you can give, like in short?
Sure. So I guess what they bring to the party is the ability to see the opportunity to make something more affordable and accessible with technology, with experience, with business model innovation. That's a really key part of it. So, and that's probably harder for someone with less experience to do. So bringing that knowledge so that you can think about how do we really completely radically reshape the business model so that it is profitable at a different level, but it is profitable, because then scale becomes the big payoff. So seeing that, and then seeing that local perspective is essential. You don't see the opportunity very well until you're local, or you have local eyes or local, real context for understanding something. That's where mobile telephony took off in Africa, the continent of Africa, by a Sudanese entrepreneur. He was living in the UK at the time, Mo Ibrahim, who started Celltel.
Yeah, I saw
he understood it from the local perspective. He understood that yes, people didn't have a lot of landlines, but that's not what he was going to be competing against. He was going to be competing against, I have to travel for a day to go talk to my mother in another town or another village. So when you're looking at that competition and you completely change the business model so it's affordable and accessible, a mobile phone, that was the beginning of a really rapid scaling of that market. An enormous opportunity, but he started with a really local view of what are you competing with and what's the struggle. That's the secret.
That's awesome. And in startups world, we talk about build painkillers, not vitamins.
Yes.
Like vitamins, you don't have to take painkillers. You have to.
Yes.
So
that's a great expression.
Yeah, great expression.
Yeah.
Actually, I heard that from some other folks. And I think the message to the Walmarts of the world and Amazon is like, when you take these companies, your model to other countries, make sure you are addressing the local pain points. Because the first world pain points are not the same as the third world pain points, right?
Exactly.
So they're totally different. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's one of my favorite stories in the book is a micro insurance company
Yeah.
that figured out a way using a mobile telephone to sell tiny, small amounts of insurance compared to what we would be used to in the West, but that were life-changing amounts to people in India and parts of Africa. That's a local perspective, and that's been a really successful startup.
Yeah, one of our startups in our incubator is actually, they're trying to do that. They're trying to do earthquake insurance.
Yes, okay.
They will give you, like, I believe they have $5,000 plan and then $10,000, but they are saying that you have to pay very small amount, like $5 a month or $10 a month.
Right.
But I think seeing this example, if they can bundle that with the product sale, like when you go to AT&T and you get the phone and then they work through that.
That's exactly
then
what they did.
It's hidden in there.
Exactly.
And then AT&T gets more business, right?
Yep.
Because of that feature. And this company also
it's business model innovation, right?
Yeah.
The individual customer is not paying out for insurance, but when they top up their minutes, that's part of the promotion that the mobile company is happy to pay. And the money changes hands only through that mobile phone. No bank accounts, no numbers, no checks. Through this technology of the mobile phone, that's made it possible, affordable and accessible.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always say this is age of partnership and alliances, and this is one perfect example.
Exactly.
So one last question for you is, what are the things you think, if you were writing this book today, which you could have included, which are not in here, or with ideas which this conversation has started, and you have more ideas now, like one or two things?
Well, we're already talking, people are very hungry for these ideas, but they want to know how. So how do I interpret what you said into my actual practice? And so we're working on possibly a follow-up book or talking about that with people, but we would love to have maybe taken another level of case study, for a better example, about how people did it. How did they come up with the business model? What did they change? How did they see the opportunity? What were the mistakes they made along the way? So taking the stories we bring to life in the book and making them more real for people so they can see how hard the path is, but also when you know you've got the right thing and it grows.
That's awesome. Karen, thank you very much for spending
Sarabjit.
some time with me, and it has been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
you.
Appreciate it.